Welcome to the Hyper Room. I'm your host, Casey Lau. Each episode of the Hyper Room, I'll be interviewing people from different walks of life that are in the pop culture world, from comics to movies to toys to video games and beyond. You'll hear from people who contribute to the creative or business side of the pop culture industry, giving you insight into the thought process behind the stuff that we all get excited about. This episode, I welcome Erik Larsen, co-founder of Image Comics and the creator of the Savage Dragon. Erik has drawn just about every DC and Marvel Comics character, from the Doom Patrol to the Teen Titans, the Outsiders, Aquaman, the Punisher, Defenders, Wolverine, Fantastic Four, and one incredible issue of Thor. But back in 1990, Erik hit peak popularity when he took over the art for the Amazing Spider-Man comic book series. Then 2 years later, makes comic book history when he and 6 other Marvel creators decide to leave and start their own comic book publishing company, Image Comics. At Image, Erik brought a character he created when he was a kid, Savage Dragon.
Now we have the Dragon.
And has never looked back, hitting Savage Dragon issue number 232 as of this podcast recording. That's over 25 years of Erik writing and drawing the adventures of the dragon every single month. 25 years and counting. That is an amazing feat in this world of comic book reboots and rebirths. Erik's perspective on the comics world is incredible, and I really enjoy talking to him about his career and getting into the creative process behind producing the monthly adventures of his green-skinned, fin-headed superhero. So buckle in, Hypernauts, as I take Erik Larsen into the Hyper Room.
The Hyper Room.
So I always start off the podcast interviews by asking the subject, what is their earliest pop culture memory? So what is the one thing that you remember when you were a kid? Is it a comic? Is it a movie? Is it a toy? What is the one thing you remember that kind of sets up, your past?
I can't put dates on anything is a problem. I'm not sure in which order anything took place. When I grew up, and my dad collected comics when he was a kid, so we grew up with his comic.
Okay.
I have an older brother and 2 younger sisters, so he kind of let us at them when we were way too young to appreciate such things. And he delighted for years in pointing out comic books on the walls of comic book stores and saying, I used to have that one. Because we destroyed a good number of them. And then he kind of put them away for a while, and then later on gave them to me again. And then my house burned down. So it's just one series of accidents after another.
Oh man! Do you remember? And you remember which one was your favorite?
There's a bunch of them because he had a pile of comics. By the time they were given to me, there were just over 650 different Golden Age comics.
Wow! Ranging
from he had a big run of Captain Marvel adventures. He had smatterings of DC stuff. No Marvel books that I can recall. I think Powerhouse Pepper may have been a Marvel book at one point.
Wow, those are deep cuts.
Yeah, and then he kept buying, and as he got older, comics kind of grew up with him. And so he was into the EC comic stuff right out of the gate. So he had all the early Vault of Horror and Crypt of Terror and all that stuff. He had just all those things. And then when EC Comics went out of business, there were no comics for him to read anymore, and he stopped reading comics. That was the end of that. And that's when his Playboy collection kicked in.
Did you pass those on to you as well?
I don't know whatever happened to those. Those may have been sold to some collector some years ago, but they did not end up in my hands.
Wow. So let me tell you my earliest Erik Larsen memory. So to give you an idea of how you've come into, I guess, my comic buying life, I believe it was the first time I saw your work was on Amazing Spider-Man,
Okay.
and you'd taken over for Todd McFarlane. And I remember saying, who is this guy? You know, I guess Todd McFarlane had a bit of a following, and then there's this new guy on it when it seemed like it was at its peak.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember getting that assignment?
Yeah. No, it was a good gig. Pretty much everybody wanted that assignment. That was the book to get because it was doing real well, and then Todd was moving on, and it seemed like, geez, who wouldn't want that job? And it's like people think, oh, but you're a big shoes to fill, but it's like I don't care. That's a good book, and that book's not going away. So
I see they're still reprinting the stories. I think I just picked up something recently that had recolored the Sinister Six stuff that you did.
oh yeah, well, cool.
Yeah. I mean, do you see royalties for that still, or is that a different time and a different kind of thing?
Yeah, occasionally they'll kick over something.
Okay.
So it works out all right.
It's very cool. So let me ask you, what was your first paying comic book gig?
The first paying one was I worked on a book called Megaton,
Yeah.
which was published by a guy named Gary Carlson. It was a black and white superhero book, and that was in the 80s. At some point, the job that I had done on it, it didn't come out, as I recall, for a couple of years by the time it actually saw print. But I drew it when I was 19, so I was a young guy.
And what was that about? Was that the first dragon, or was that his own Megaton
there was
character?
a character called Vanguard that Gary
yes.
and I co-created, and I did eventually work Dragon into the story, but it took a few issues before that happened.
And then from there, when did it become a full-time career for you?
Can't quite put a year on it. I was definitely trying to get whatever I could get right out of the gate. I was doing stuff for AC Comics or Americomics, which is a small publisher in Florida, for a little while. And then I did some stuff for Eclipse. And somewhere in there I met Jim Shooter. And we had we'd kind of gone back and forth over the mail because I'd been submitting stuff all the time because that was the gig. I wanted to work at Marvel Comics. And so at some point I met him at a Chicago convention, and I had a stack of comic stuff that I had done. And so, I had something that I could legitimately show. And it was, so his thing was, oh, you're a professional now. And I was like, yes, I am.
And how old are you at this point?
God, I'm not sure.
Early 20s.
Early 20s, probably, yeah, I would guess. Because, by the time I guess, yeah, must have been. Right.
So taking your samples and your published work and meeting Jim Shooter. I mean, even today, I think meeting Jim Shooter would be quite a thing.
Yeah, it was a deal. I wanted to, I wanted to get the Marvel gigs. I grew up with those characters and loved that stuff, and that was the dream. So when I met him, he asked me how I'd like to do a story for Marvel Fanfare, which I didn't know meant how would you like to do an inventory story. What I thought it meant was how would you like to do a story for Marvel Fanfare. So I said, oh, that sounds like fun. Why don't we plot it at the show? And he was kind of taken back and came back with okay. And so we did. Later we just sort of met at the bar and we just kicked around the basic idea of a Hulk versus Thor story. And then I drew that up and once I'd had that drawn, that was just the ultimate like job just to get other jobs, because I could show that to any publisher and they'd be like, well, I recognize those guys. That you seem to have it pretty well together here. And it played to all my strengths. It was just like two guys kicking the crap out of each other.
So at this early age, you're sitting with Jim Shooter, plotting a story out with the main Marvel characters. I mean, what's going through your mind at this point? This sounds incredible.
Well, it's like, because he approached it very much like the way I approach it when I'm working with folks, which is, what do you want to draw? Because it's like I can come up with a story for any character in my book. If somebody's like, I want to do a backup for you, it's like, all right, what characters? Let me narrow this down a little. So I kind of came at him with, I'd like to do a story that had, Hulk and Thor always have these fights and there's never any definitive answer as to who's stronger. I'd like to do a story which there's a definitive answer to that question. And so the two of us just kind of kicked stuff back and forth and came up with something. And then I went home and I drew it. And it eventually did see print as an issue of Thor. It ended up being scripted by Stan Lee and kind of reworked a little bit in terms of how the story played out. And then it was inked by Vinnie Coletta. So I was kind of subbing for Jack Kirby.
This is the dream come true. This is beyond.
It was the dream. And I was like, this is what I want. But you start off there and it's like, okay, you got nowhere to go but down, kid.
Exactly. Got to start my own comic company then. I to kind of take it over. Go to the next level. Wow.
Yeah. That was a real mic drop moment.
Was it easy? Was it easy or hard? I mean, that sounds so. Basically, you're a young professional. You're going to conventions, and you're looking to meet Marvel editors, and you come across the big one. Was it hard at that point to do that? To find meet these kind of editors and be able to show them your work? Because I guess there wasn't a lot of competition back then.
It was not crazy competition. I guess it helped that he recognized my name because I had pestered him on numerous occasions, so it wasn't that I wasn't a complete stranger to him. Let's just put it that way.
But then you had to do. Is that in person or by mail?
That was in person. Yeah, that was in person. Okay. So, but I had sent him a bunch of stuff through the mail. So when I showed up there and had my portfolio, which was just crammed full of stuff because I'd been working at Americomics and working at Megaton doing Vanguard. So I had, accumulated a bunch of stuff. And really that's what you want when you're showing people your samples. You don't want to be showing them like, hey, look, I've drawn 3 pages and one of them's not done yet. You want to show them that, look, this guy's capable of producing a body of work. He's not going to just get, 3 panels in and quit. We want somebody who's going to actually do the job. And that was all about, all right, I want to show these guys that I can do this. So that was what that was all about.
Do you think that if your career would have been different if you had the internet, was able to reach out that way to editors?
I mean, it's all just different tools of accomplishing the same stuff. So, I mean, at that point, it was all making photocopies of stuff and sending samples out to whatever editor you could get a hold of, So a lot of guys who were eager to get work would just open up Marvel Comics, flip through them, find out who all the editors were, and just send stuff to everybody.
That's great. And then how fast were you back then? Like how long would it take you to do a penciled page?
I was pretty much at least a page a day kind of guy. So
that's what you have to do, right? Basically to be able to.
I mean, really what it comes down to is you need to be able to do a page a day if you're going to make this stuff work.
But you're faster than a page a day, aren't you? I mean,
Yeah, it
you juggle a
depends.
bunch of series at the same time.
I've done a bunch of stuff. I know I'm capable of it. There just ends up being an awful lot of screwing off time that creeps into the mix.
Ah, and you probably don't need to do heavy pencils anymore, right? You can kind of ink your
Yeah,
loose
I
layouts,
don't have
right?
to do much.
So you can do that quite quickly. Because I remember you just recently did a run on Spawn with Todd,
Uh-huh.
and at the same time you're doing Savage Dragon. I mean,
Yeah.
how does that work in your day work day?
Well, you just kind of mostly I would just try and get one done so I could get on the other one. I didn't like to kind of juggle back and forth between the two. So it would be, oh, let me plow through this thing. But I was doing, it was, it was not as intensive as Dragon stuff on Spawn because Todd was adding digital inks to stuff. So what I was doing is I was sending him stuff that was inked with just like a marker, like a Pentel rolling writer. So he was getting inked pages that he could use verbatim if he wanted to, but for the most part, he was just coming in and adding stuff and working over it. But those went pretty quick. I was doing like 4 or 5 pages a day for him.
So if you do that and Dragon at the same time, is that easier than doing like 100-page issue of Savage Dragon when you release these giant
Yeah,
comics out there?
it depends. It depends how intense anything is. It depends the level of detail I'm doing on it. It depends on just there's a lot of factors that come into play. It really does because if I'm doing pencils for some other inker, that's one thing. If I'm having to spot blacks and put in rendering and there just ends up being all sorts of different levels of detail. But I've done a bunch of stuff before. At one point, I was penciling Amazing Spider-Man and penciling Thor and still doing Savage Dragon, and that was a intense little period of time.
And why do you do that to yourself?
It's fun. It's just
Exactly.
fun. It's just like these. I like these characters, and I like doing this, and I like the challenge of seeing if I can do a bunch of crazy stuff. And I just find that really the work expands to fill the time you have to do it in. So if I've got 3 days to do something, I'll do it in 3 days. And if I've got 3 weeks to do something, it'll take me 3 weeks.
Understand. Interesting. So as of this recording, yesterday, Savage Dragon 231 came out.
Mm-hmm.
How does that feel when a new issue comes out and you keep going at these huge numbers? I mean, it's amazing when I see it. It's pretty cool. But how about yourself?
No, I like it, and as as time goes on, there gets to be, I get to those points where, I remember reading Fantastic Four when it was on issue 231. I remember reading, it's like you remember reading all these different books when they were at these certain points.
But they didn't have the same creative teams when they hit those numbers. They probably went through 5 or 6 creative teams.
They went through a bunch of them, just a whole ton of guys. But like even Fantastic Four, which had Stan and Jack on it, they did 102 consecutive issues together. But at that point, it was just anybody. John Romita did it for a little while, and John Buscema did it for a little while, and Rich Buckler did it for a while, and George Perez, and John Byrne was laying it out for a little bit, and then Bill Sienkiewicz was drawing it, and then there was just a bunch of guys who would just do one issue, from Ross Andrew, Ramona Fraden, Sal Buscema, just a whole slew of people had come and gone on that book, and meanwhile it's still the same one guy on Savage Dragon.
But yet it feels like there are different teams on it, because your style changes a little bit, and then the main character changes, and kind of now recently, the kind of theme of the book is changing a bit. Like, how do you prepare this? Is it obviously you want to entertain yourself? You keep doing this for how many years now? And I just want to know, how do you think about this going forward every year?
Well, I don't make make sort of huge sweeping long range plans, but it's not small intricate day-to-day plans necessarily. So while I may be going, I'm going to plant the seeds for this character going somewhere and having something go on, I'm not sitting there going, well, I need to figure out 10 issues from now what goes on in panel 3. It's very broad, like, okay, Malcolm's got kids and those kids are going to grow up and this happens with those kids eventually. But from a day-to-day thing, it can be anything. And so I like to be able to kind of keep that spontaneity and stuff, because it just keeps me thinking new stuff and keeping it fresh that way.
So do you have a plan to like number 300, or is it even a bit further than that?
It's not as specific as that.
Okay.
if that makes sense. Like, I'll be sitting there going, I know what I want these kids to be like when they're 15, but I don't know, well, what issue number is that necessarily, because the book is set in real time, and if I manage to get 10 issues out a year, that could be a different number than if I did 12 issues a year, or if I was only able to squeak out 8 because of extenuating circumstances.
How autobiographical is the dragon?
Hardly at all.
So this is a character you created when you were a teenager, and you just you wanted to take this character for as long as you could because you just loved him so much.
Yeah, I mean, but there are things where I can go, okay, well, those are things that I might say because I'm writing his words literally, So there's that. But in terms of, I didn't wake up in a burning field and I didn't do all sorts of stuff.
Sure. But I mean, have you lived in Canada? Have you done those kind of things?
I've never lived in Canada. I've never lived in Chicago.
Okay.
I've never fought a guy with an exposed brain. Not even one.
But these are things that you think about when you're having lunch. What would it be like if I fought a guy with an exposed brain?
Boy, I would think there'd be a lot of poking going on with that. I would just let's just see what happens. Watch him twitch. But there's basic little stuff where you go, well, I got married, I had kids. My wife said this silly thing to me, or she acts this way, or says this thing, or does this, and it's like every now and then there'll be something that'll creep in there, but it's not a lot. It's not like I'm sitting there writing down stuff as people say things. Right.
I want to go back a little bit back to the beginning of Image Comics. And I know you've done a lot of recent videos and interviews and stuff about the history and the creation of Image. So I'm not going to go around that, but I think this podcast and the listeners will be a little bit more geeky and want to know a little bit more detailed than the kind of overall, like how you guys just walked out of Marvel and DC and just kind of started your own company. I'm always curious about how it started at the beginning. So you guys all left with your own ideas, and then I think you worked with a company called Malibu Comics, right? They did all the kind of logistics for you. Is that right?
Uh-huh.
So basically, because obviously you're doing the book, so you need like 100% time to work on these books and get them out as fast as you possibly could. And so basically these guys just help do just the office work, basically.
Yeah, basically it was the grunt work that the Image office does now. The process of soliciting books and talking with printers and dealing with the various other vendors and people that need to be talked with in order to make this stuff happen.
How much of that office work do you have to deal with
now? None.
Yeah, now. Okay.
Yeah. Now we've got a whole bunch of our own guys who are doing all that stuff. So, they'll run things by us when it needs to be run by. So, like, I'll get emails from them saying, "Hey, if you want your book to come out this time, you got to get it in by this date, that sort of thing. But and I'll write my own solicitation copy, and I'll have to draw covers and stuff like that in order to get things done. And they'll let me know, hey, we need a cover by the 15th if you want to get your book solicited to come out, in June, that sort of thing.
So you basically do all your work. You have your own colorist, you have your own lettering, just to basically deliver the final pages to Image Central, and then they do the rest.
Yeah.
So interesting. So how is it? And I understand the previews catalog, the Diamond catalog, the solicitations you're talking about takes like 3 months ahead of time, right? So have you done the book already?
I think we're doing June right now.
Okay.
So we're soliciting June books.
Have you done the June book?
Oh no, not even close.
Okay, interesting.
Close. No, when you see these comics on the stands, they are fresh. Those are fresh squeezed.
Even Marvel and DC are that tight as well?
Oh yeah. It's all pretty tight to the day. And I mean, it used to be that they would have their act far more together, and they would have people working way ahead of time. But I think a lot of us broke them of that habit, and so you got guys who were just doing stuff really on the fly, like that issue of Dragon that's out today. I turned in right around January 1st, so it's about a month between the time that I turned it in and the time that it is out and on sale.
And then how long does it take to actually make it? So if you do the full pencil and ink page in the day, and then the coloring and lettering, how long does that take?
It's done as I do it. So I'll when I pencil a page and then I ink it, then I'll send it to the colorist as soon as it's done and scanned in, and then he'll color it. So really, when it gets down to me finally inking my final page, usually they'll be right on my ass. So like right now, as we speak, I think I've got a couple pages more to ink on issue 232.
Really?
So, yeah. So it's that late.
And how long does it take to print the book and get it to Diamond?
Not very long.
Okay.
It's pretty quick process. So, I mean, this issue should be out the first week of March. Okay. And it's February 8th right now?
Exactly.
So, but it'll be done next week. It'll be completely done. I'll scripted it, and it'll be out the door. So it's not a huge long process. The inking part's the longest part of it.
Oh, interesting. And then how important are the trade paperback versions of the books compared to like the monthly issues that come out in terms of sales or distribution, things like that?
It really depends on the book, on the specific title. Savage Dragon is much more single issue oriented, I think, than a lot of books are. I think most people read it in the single issue comic book format because there's just letters, pages, and there's extra stuff that's in the regular comic that isn't in the trades. And it's because of the nature of the book, people just seem to want to read it as it's coming out, which is fine. I that's the format I prefer. So
I read them all when they came out one by one. I do read them like that. But then when I went back to read them, I read them in one big bulk in these collections, and it's quite exciting to see it like that, actually. It's a lot of energy. There's a lot of things happening because, after 20 years, I've kind of forgot some of the characters that started off. But when you go back, you actually see them. It's like they have arcs and they have cycles and everything in the story. So it's quite interesting when you go back and read it like that.
Well, so characters are literally growing up.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
It's like, oh, that character didn't exist, and now it's his book.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I think it's quite interesting, and that's why I guess it keeps it fresh, and people keep coming back to read it, and it still has. And I don't know, you tell me, but I feel like it's got more of a bump these days. There's more people talking about it than they have in a while, and I don't know if it's because of Malcolm himself or the kind of style of storytelling you're doing now. What do you think? Am I right or am I wrong?
It's certainly the fan reaction has been much more vocal than it had been in a while. I don't actually keep that much track of what the numbers are. I don't care.
Okay.
I know there are people who really do focus on that and want to know, like, oh, what did I do this month as opposed to last month or whatever. And it's like, as long as I can still do the book, I'm happy to do it, and I'll just continue. So that's basically what I'm concerned about. It's like, am I still getting a check? Okay, we're good.
Do you think there's more? Do you think the audience is growing with Malcolm?
It seems it.
Yeah.
It seems it. But like I said, I haven't checked in on the numbers. Certainly a lot. I'm getting a lot more response than I had been. Up until recently. So it's sort of like, and I've been hearing from a lot of people who were lapsed readers
coming
saying,
back,
yeah. I'm back to reading it again. I haven't been reading it for a while, but good Lord, have things changed?
Yeah, exactly. I remember John Burns said that he had like a faithful 20,000, I think, something like that. That he had like a readers, like he could do anything, and he'd have like his fan base would always come to whatever he was doing, no matter how weird it was. What do you think about that?
I don't think it's that many anymore, John.
No, exactly. No, maybe I read that in the that was something maybe from the 80s or 90s, exactly. And when he was much more of a household name and doing more work.
Yeah,
as well,
I mean, I think at a time, it's people are, the book is always going to bounce up by a certain amount and stuff like that. I don't know that that's the case quite so much anymore. I don't know. I'll be curious to see how things go with a lot of stuff.
So you live in San Francisco. What's a typical day like for you? Like, what time do you get up? Do you jump on the drawing board right away? I'd like to know, just curious.
It kind of depends on the day. Because I have a friend who has a studio that I used to actually be part of his studio years ago, and we sort of reconnected recently because I moved back to San Francisco. I lived in the East Bay for a while, and so Mondays I'll come down and hang out at his studio and just draw down there. So it gives me a time just to not be in the house looking at the same four walls. And then generally on a Wednesday, I'll go, there's a coffee shop around here where I go to and just hang out there and draw there for part of the day. And then on Fridays, I always take a lunch with a pal of mine and, just trying to mix things up so it doesn't seem like I'm never leaving the house or doing anything. And then Tuesdays and Thursdays is just straight on here. Working like a dog.
What time?
And it just depends on the day.
Sure.
It really does. But generally, I got a young son who's going to college here, and he's living at home. So when my wife gets up to get him squared away, I'll generally drag my sorry ass out of bed shortly thereafter. So
and then how long can you sit and draw for in a day on a typical day? Are you
it depends on how into it I am at the time. I can usually go and do a few hours and then go get lunch and do a few more, but it really does depend. If I've got days when I sit there and just stare and don't get much done. And then I got days where I'm firing on all cylinders and getting all kinds of work done. So it just depends, and also what the deadlines are looking like.
Do you read comic books still?
Yeah, I'm trying to read more because I've kind of fallen out with a lot of it. So the last short while lately, I've been trying to give a bunch of stuff a read and see how that goes.
And then when you read it, are you reading Marvel? You're reading DC? Reading Image? I mean, I guess you're reading all of it just to see what's going on. Right?
Yeah, kind of everything, just to see what the state of the art is. Because I'm at Image and because I'm one of the owners of Image, I'm sent all the Image books, so I get like just a huge
every week
amount of those. So I got tons and tons of Image stuff.
Yeah.
And then Image trades with DC. So I also get all the DC books. So there's
that's a lot of reading to do.
It is a ton of comics. I don't read everything by a large stretch. I mean, it's like, but it's pushing me out of my house basically. But there's a lot of comics, and then I'll buy whatever Marvel comics I feel like when I go into the store, and I do generally go in every week. Sometimes I walk out empty-handed, but they actually are getting more of my attention recently, just because I've liked some of the stuff that's been coming out.
Yeah. So. Anything you want to mention? You know what I like? I like this X-Men Grand Design book that's come out. Have you seen this?
I have not seen
that. It's like a retelling of the X-Men story from the beginning, and kind of like a I don't know, that's done by the guy that does the hip hop.
Oh yeah.
And it's got this old paper, and they're all drawn very indie style, but it's mostly text based. But it's incredible because if you read those comics when you were growing up, they kind of and they're using all the retcons and kind of trying to make sense of the whole thing, and it's quite fun.
Oh, cool!
But it's something that Marvel wouldn't normally do. They'd probably, I don't know, maybe it's different now, but that's a kind of a very indie thinking book that fits into the mainstream.
They've done weird stuff like that before, where they have Peter Bagg did a crazy Spider-Man thing.
Yeah.
They had. I didn't remember seeing. Jaime Hernandez did I remember him doing I just can recall in my head right now a cover that had the Invisible Girl and the Wasp and the Scarlet Witch walking down the beach. I couldn't tell you the name of the title. Strange Tales? I think they had a bunch of indie guys doing stuff, and I know DC has done that before, where they had that Bizarro Comics.
Yeah, that was cool.
One shot where they had a bunch of different guys doing that, and kind of the amazing thing to me about a lot of those things is when they have indie guys do this stuff, is that very often those books seem to have a lot more reverence for the characters than the guys who were doing the regular Marvel books.
Yeah, agreed.
But these guys are just sitting there going, I love this stuff so much, and their love is just showing on every page. And then you read the regular comics, and it's like, you guys could use a little of that sometimes.
Do you think that the popularity of these Marvel films have brought new readers into the comic book stores and maybe looking at even Savage Dragon and Image comics, because they're not like little kids anymore? I mean, there's little kids watching.
I don't know. Older people. I don't know. It's certainly, if their sales are not going great guns, you would not think that it's really making a huge impact. And I know that with a lot of those movie stuff, there just doesn't seem to be a huge correlation between the movies and the comics. And very often the comics are so divorced from what's going on in the movies anyway, that I could see, a fan coming in and going, okay, give me the Avengers. And then being like, which one?
Exactly. And then the one that you get doesn't have the ones from the movie. You don't know what's going on, right?
Yeah. It's like, what's happening? What's this all about? This isn't that cool.
That's a good thing to bring to the next point. I read a post you did on Facebook that the definitive version of Savage Dragon is being put out every month. There's no need for a film or another cartoon. You've done that already. What is your thoughts on that? You really don't want to see a Savage Dragon live action movie?
Well, this is sort of thing where if somebody came to me and said, "Hey, I'm a big shot director. I want to make a Savage Dragon movie. Can I license this from you?" I'd be like, "Sure, whatever."
Okay. Okay.
But am I going to go, "You know what? I really want this to happen. I'm going to go down and I'm going to knock on a bunch of
Like
doors and
Todd.
I'm going to take a
Todd really
bunch of
wants it to
meetings
happen.
and I'm going to get this to happen." And it's like, I'm not going to do that because I'd rather just work on my comics. But if somebody had come to me and wanted to do something, I'm not an idiot.
It's
It's just not nothing that I'm sitting there going, "This is my dream."
yeah, sure.
Because it's not my dream. My dream is to do my comics and continue to do my comics and be able to do that every month forever.
Speaking of Facebook, I see you use it a lot. And I remember in the old days when Stan Lee had Stan's soapbox, and you'd kind of peer into the Marvel bullpen with what he would say about the other artists and writers working there. But for you, you have a direct channel to your fan base, and it's fascinating. I find that to be almost as entertaining as the comic itself, because I love to see the thought process behind creators like yourself. And you post a lot of stuff about, here's what pencils look like. You didn't, I wouldn't even notice it unless I saw you. You did an issue recently where you drew it like on normal paper and blew it up or shrank it down from not those big boards to smaller boards. I find that very fascinating. What do you think? What do you get out of doing all this Facebook work besides not working?
Yeah, that's the thing, is it really does kind of kill way more time than it oughta. And that's the downfall of this. Facebook isn't my job. and it can't,
kind of is, isn't it? Kind of it is, because you're building a relationship with the reader.
I guess you are,
Yeah.
but at the same time, it's like, you can piss people off just as easily by getting into something that they don't want to hear.
Yeah. Like having Donald Trump the villain.
Yeah, or whatever. Whatever it is. There's people are bound to take offense at something.
Yeah.
And some people, that's really what they're all about, is finding ways to get pissed off about something. It's like, I want to be outraged all the time.
Yeah.
What have you said? Let me take that out of context. I'm sure I can make something out of that.
Yeah, I think Facebook allows a lot of those people to say what they want on these kind of social networks, and it's kind of tough. But I still think there is the loyal following that maybe doesn't say anything, that just likes things, that I think get a charge out of it. Because I see a lot of the image guys are on Facebook, posting what they're working on. Here's a cover coming up. It's like almost like, do we need the solicitation catalog anymore when people are kind of following you and finding out what's happening next, or some new project you're working on, things like that?
Yeah, it's cool. It's nice to be able to get some immediate feedback. When you screw up on something, people let you know about it pretty quick. So there's definitely some good things to it. The problem can get to be where you're just so hooked into getting that immediate feedback that you just do that all day instead of doing what you're supposed to be doing all day.
Yeah, true.
Because it's super, super easy to just look up and go, "Oh, look at that! 6 hours just went by, and all I've done is updated my Facebook status and responded to a bunch of people's stuff."
Have you had time to look at all these new superhero movie trailers that have been popping up this last week? So much new stuff.
I see them some. I don't necessarily seek out everything all the time.
They just pop up on your news feed, and then you're like, "Oh, let's check this out."
Yeah, I generally go and see the Marvel movies. I have seen some of the DC ones. I haven't seen all of them.
Oh, interesting. That's as a fan for myself, even if they're bad, I'm going to go see it. So it's not a thing.
Oh, I've missed a lot of the bad ones. Like,
you're lucky.
I didn't see I didn't see any of the Fantastic Four movies in theaters because I'd already heard that they're terrible. So it's like, all right, well, I'll pass on that.
Okay.
But I did see all of them eventually at home, and I just didn't get out to see the Justice League. I just didn't care enough. But I did see Wonder Woman in the theaters and liked that well enough.
I think that all these, as a whole, they may not be good, but as a comic fan, there's always something in these movies that makes you a little bit excited, right? I
Yeah,
mean, you see the
yeah.
parademon flying, you see a lot of mention of Jack Kirby. When I watched Thor Ragnarok, the one thing I was most excited about was all the characters in the background looked like they were designed by Jack Kirby, like everything. So you can see
Yeah,
these
no,
guys.
it's cool. It's cool that this stuff exists, because it didn't for years. For
Exactly.
all this stuff, all I got, we got the Christopher Reeve movies when I was a kid.
Yeah. I got the Michael Keaton Batman where he couldn't really move or turn sideways
Yeah,
in
you
his little.
can't
And
turn your head.
it's funny when you watch those movies. A Superman, those movies, I don't know, they still kind of hold up, but the Batman movies, it's compared to the new ones, you're just a different beast completely. It's crazy. What's happening? Or can you tell us what's happening 2018 for Savage Dragon? What's going to be? What are some little drops of story you can share with
Jeez,
us?
man.
Or is it only going to be known a month before the issue comes out?
I'm pretty much making this stuff up as I go along. Um, at this point, I'm uh, planting a lot of seeds for what I'm going. I mean, at this right now, the plan is for Malcolm to be in Toronto from here on out. It's not like we're going to be back in Chicago after a short arc. It's just no. This is the new world. So it's time to populate this new reality, this new world, this new location with various characters. And a lot of it's going to be just figuring out his new life there. And adding a lot of supporting characters and introducing a lot of new villains and stuff like that. And then there'll be other characters that have existed. We'll be checking in on them because I've kind of have set up there being a new Freak Force, which is filling in for him down in Chicago. So we'll touch in on some of the Freak Force stuff and some of those characters and see what's going on there, and then just plant the seeds for the future with kids and how things are going and stuff like that. There's in the context of the comic, they're shooting a reality TV show
Yeah.
with Malcolm and his life, so that kind of comes into that comes around this year, and we'll get sort of people's reaction to that and how they're acting in front of the camera kind of colors the way people are perceiving them and stuff like that. So there's a lot of kind of fun story stuff that comes out of that sort of thing.
The stuff with Malcolm's wife's mom, is that something you plan, or is that just something that shows up? You're like, let's bring the mom in and let's have her interact with one of the villains or one of the other characters in the comic in an interesting, different way.
It really, a lot of stuff that's in the book is done very spur of the moment, just like, oh, this will be cool, or this will be a surprise, and so it's not like it's carefully thought out years ahead of time, and I've got my crazy pie charts all worked out. It's and then this is going to go here, and this is. A lot of it's just flying by the seat of my pants, mostly because I'm trying to make the book seem a little more real.
Yeah.
And
And today, and very modern, I think.
Well, much like in anybody's real life, you're sitting there going, I've got my long-term plans. Yeah. I want to learn how to play the oboe and be at the London Symphony Orchestra. And it's like, okay, you've got your long-term plans. I want to have a wife and 2.5 kids and a white picket fence and live in this place and do this. We all have things that we aspire to be and things we aspire to do. And those are things that we're working toward. At the same time, your drunk Uncle Fester shows up and you got to deal with it. Something happens in your life, something goes on down the street, and that interferes with whatever your long-term plan is. And suddenly it's like, oh, okay, I've got this nonsense I got to deal with. How am I going to cope with that and get this part done and get this other stuff done? And you just kind of have to deal with it.
I want to ask you about Robert Kirkman. How important was he to the kind of continued success of Image Comics? Would you say it was a lot or a little bit?
I mean, he ended up being a real successful dude, but you didn't know that when you start out.
Yeah,
you can just go, I hope this guy does good work. I know he was pitching Image all kinds of books and wasn't getting a huge amount of traction there. So I had him do a Super Patriot miniseries.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And that sort of established that he could do a regular book and established that Cory Walker could draw a regular book, which led to Invincible.
Which is now ending.
Which, it's now ending, but that planted a lot of other seeds. It's like, okay, this guy's now a dependable source for producing comic books. So The Walking Dead, so this, that, and the other thing. And one thing begat something else, and pretty soon.
But it's really neat that he's kind of also, because of The Walking Dead, he's very like a figurehead now. He's kind of like, he's really pushing Image. He's really pushing independent comic creators to come out and do new, exciting things. I think that's very exciting.
It's awesome. It's awesome that he's doing that. I appreciate it. Appreciate it every day.
Yeah, interesting.
And it's like, okay, cool. It's cool that somebody's using their powers for good, that sort of thing. That he's going and doing this history of the comics and getting things done there, and getting some of those stories told while people are still alive and kicking and able to tell them.
Exactly. That's also very, very good. Yeah, that show, that documentary, The Secret History of Comics, is fantastic. I thought, what's watching it? It's going to give like a whole new generation more information on Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, the Superman creators, all these people that people don't know anything about, but because they only see the films today. I think it's a good thing. How often do you meet up with the other Image founders? Do you guys meet up once a year or no?
Let's say we somehow manage to run into each other a couple times a year. Okay. It just depends on the circumstances. Like last year, I think we showed up at an Image Expo or something like that, and it seems like there's a couple other things last year, various conventions and stuff like that. We try to be in touch, that sort of thing.
Yeah, great. All right, I want to do this final speed round, ask you a question, and then see what your quick answer would be. What is your favorite issue of Savage Dragon?
I don't have one.
Interesting. Interesting. Do you have a favorite arc?
No, I really don't. It's all over the place. There's like it's like, oh, I like this one, I don't like that one. I like this. It's all over the place, and it can vary from day to day, but there's no one that I could point to and go, yeah, this is the best.
And do you revisit this stuff? Do you look back at the issues? Maybe like, do you actually read them again, or besides looking for maybe reference, like what did I do in issue 32 or whatever?
I'll look back at stuff on occasion.
Okay, so you're not embarrassed looking back at the very early issues like some creators might.
Well, I'm not. I tend to look forward rather than back, in for the most part. So I don't sit there and dwell on things. But when I'm sitting there working on stuff, I might go, well, wait a minute, what happened back then? And is there something I can follow up on, or are there seeds that were planted then that I can use now, or whatever? Probably not issue 32, but
Who is your favorite dragon villain?
Again, it just kind of depends at the time who I'm drawing. If I'm sitting there drawing Brainy Ape, it's like, oh, he's awesome. If I'm sitting there drawing Powerhouse, it's like, oh, he's so great. Why did I ever not want to use him? It's just whoever it is at the time. I know people like Overlord a lot. He's not high on my list. Mr. Glum is pretty high on it though.
You've used him a lot, yeah.
Yeah,
he's always fun when he pops up. Yeah.
So it just depends.
Who's your favorite comic creator of all time?
Jack Kirby.
Of course. Who's your favorite Jack Kirby hero?
I think kind of the ultimate Marvel creation is the Thing.
Okay.
Just because it's like he is the big innovation there, in that we hadn't really done monster as hero much of anywhere before, and just that you're like be able to turn that into something. Suddenly you get characters like the Hulk, and suddenly you get other things that can kind of spring from that. A lot of the characters you can trace the roots and you can go, okay, well, that guy's a little derivative of this or this, but I think the Thing is pretty high up there.
What's your favorite Kirby run?
It's got to be the Fantastic Four, just because there's so much of it. It's the gift that keeps giving. But I like Commandy an awful lot too, and I like Thor. So she's got 3 pretty major long runs that you can look at and go, okay, this is cool stuff.
I feel like you pattern Dragon after Fantastic Four after his run, because it feels like every issue there's something new. It's like you look at Kirby's stuff and you're just like, this guy created so much stuff, and then when he brought him back again, they would add more stuff on top. And then that's why they still use them today, because they've layered these characters so much. And I guess you've done a lot of that too. But is that intentional, or is that just because that's just something you've picked up osmosisly by reading Kirby at such a young age?
I think just in the nature of comics, especially if you're doing it all yourself, you better have something to say, and you better be making up some characters. I don't have anybody else that I can lean on to use their stuff. So if anybody's going to be making stuff up for this book, it's got to be me.
In another universe, who's your favorite Jedi?
I have no idea.
Who's your favorite Star Trek captain?
Captain Kirk.
And who's your favorite Image founder?
Who's my favorite? Just in what regard?
Just somebody, I don't know, any regards. Your favorite artist, your best friend, the guy you like to hang out with.
I mean, my favorite artist of the group is Mark Silvestri.
Oh, okay, that's great. That's interesting. Why?
He just draws like a son of a bitch, man. That guy's just legitimately good. There's no two ways around it. I think a lot of the other guys are clearly learned from reading comics and don't have a lot of the fundamentals down, and that guy just knows what he's doing.
Very good. Thank you so much, Erik. I really appreciate your time today in the Hyper Room.
All right.
Congratulations on all your great success, and we'll be reading Savage Dragon every month.
Excellent.
All right.
All right.
Great.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Erik. I really appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks a lot.
You can find Erik on Facebook and Twitter, as we spoke about, where he spends too much time socializing with his fans. You can also head over to savagedragon.com to learn more, and visit hyperbop.co to see my recommendations on my favorite Savage Dragon books, as well as my picks for the best of Erik Larsen comics that are currently available in print and in digital.